Hello and welcome everyone. We will get things underway now. We've given a few minutes for people to jump in, but let's get started. We have a lot of ground to cover. It's an unusual time for all of us, different levels of unusual depending on where we're located. But one consistent for us is the seafood industry continues, and it's continuing on in different ways, and we're all learning how to live our lives differently and change the way we do business. So while this is the 10th year, of our IntraFish leadership events, this is only the second that we've done on a webinar format. So we're learning along with everyone else how to communicate with our readers, with our customers, and with our colleagues via this new way. So thank you all for joining. The global whitefish sector is the most traded species around the world, and arguably the most important. It's in our fish fingers, it's in our sushi rolls, it's in the center of the plate. And the species come from all around the world. So we have a lot of ground to cover, a lot of different factors that have impacted the trade of the whitefish industry. So let's get underway. There's nobody better to start us off than Beyhan de Jong. She's a seafood specialist at Rabobank, and she's got a wonderful table setting for us to get the discussion framed. Beyhan, I'm going to go ahead and let you jump on and give us an overview of the sector, and I believe there she is. I'm going to jump off, and the floor is yours, Beyhan.
Thank you, Joe, and hi everybody. Good afternoon from the Netherlands. And now I should be able to share my screen. Yep, yes. Yeah, so here we go. So first of all, I would like to thank the whole IntraFish family for organizing this webinar and giving us the chance to share our views on the challenges, but as well as on the opportunities that COVID-19 has been bringing to the whitefish industry. With my presentation today, I would like to set the scene for the panel discussion that will later follow on. And I will start my presentation by first drawing a macro picture, how COVID-19 has been impacting global economies and what our future expectations are as Rabobank. Then I will shift more focus on the seafood, particularly the whitefish industry, and share with you some recent trade data, particularly focusing on the Chinese trade flows. And then I will end up with some more micro impacts of COVID-19 on the seafood market, such as changing consumer behavior or shifting channels and so on. So here is a quick introduction to Rabobank for the ones who is not really familiar with us. So Rabobank is a globally leading food and agribusiness lender and financial services provider. We present in more than 46 countries. And I am one of the over 90 analysts that is working in the Rabobank's Food and Agribusiness Research Department. We have a long-term commitment to the whole food and agricultural value chain, including the seafood sector as well. So now let's kick off with some micro dynamics with the macro picture. I think it was like early January when we first start talking about the coronavirus, and my colleagues have been trying to estimate the impact of the coronavirus since then. I think they ran their first models in February, and that time we came up actually with 4 scenarios. And these scenarios actually we presented them at the North Atlantic Seafood Forum before, so you might have seen it already. But by that time, our scenario 4, in the one that we assumed that the virus could spread globally and turns into a global pandemic, that scenario, we name it as the unthinkable. And actually, I think not all of us see this coming. But unfortunately, a few months after that, we see that the unthinkable scenario became the reality. And since then, the COVID-19 has been spreading like wildfire. So first, it has started as a local outbreak in East Asia. The epidemic center was China. Then it quickly spread to the other parts of the world, developed into a pandemic. The epicenter shifted from China to Southern Europe, the UK, the US, Latin America, Russia. And now we still see some cluster of cases happening, but more in a controlled way, and some local flare-ups, like in Germany or the US. But we also see that some economies have been opening up, so they are relaxing the measures. And some economies are getting out of the pandemic in better shape than the rest. But one thing is that the coronavirus, is definitely leaving some scars in the global economy, which have naturally repercussions on many sectors, including the whitefish industry as well. So in this slide here, I have the went too fast. I have the GDP forecast here for the global world. So and for some regions, this is the GDP forecast, GDP changes for 2019 and for 2020 and for 2021. And my colleagues have been working on this model for a long time, and this is a very fast changing subject. So they already had to run their models a couple of times and downgrade their estimations. So since then, a lot of alterations have been made to the model, but our latest estimations actually predict a contraction in the world GDP by 4.1%. But luckily, we are expecting a growth for 2021. And as you can see, in some regions, these contractions are higher than the rest. So for instance, in Eurozone, we are forecasting a decrease of 9%. And in other Eurozone regions, and also in France, in Italy, in Spain, we are expecting a negative growth of more than 10%. That is mainly due to long and also a bit more strict lockdowns in the regions, and also because of the economy's dependency on tourism, recreation, and hospitality. And as you know, those have been all hit by the pandemic. And that is also highly relevant for the whitefish industry, as Europe is the global driver. Germany, UK, Italy, France, those are the key markets for the whitefish industry. And I would like to zoom in China here, as it has started as the epidemic's epicenter, and they are a few months ahead of the curve in terms of the economic impact. And looking at China can give us already some leads for the future. And also from a whitefish point of view, China is the processing hub. And the Chinese GDP has contracted by almost 7% in Q10 of 2020, but luckily now the economy is coming back up. So production, after a free fall, in the beginning of the year, now the production is coming up, the trade is coming up, the economies are opening up, but it's not that easy. It's still a little bit difficult because there are some uncertainties the consumers are feeling. Some consumers are still feeling being cautious, and they are avoiding going out. They are not really sure about their future. So this is already like restricting the spending. That is not only specific to China, and also we see this happening in the other parts of the world. So if we look at Europe, for instance, so also from the producer point of view, producer confidence has been historically low in many countries. And this is also reflected by the Purchasing Managers Index, which is an indicator for the economic health. And a reading of this 50, which means that no economic growth is expected. And we see that this has actually dipped in April. Particularly in April, the economy has almost came to a still stand, but luckily now it's been increasing, and from June on we are expecting a more positive growth. So we are experiencing the impacts of COVID-19 in many sectors and up and down on the supply chain. So we won't have time to discuss all of this today, but it's for sure that COVID-19 is bringing uncertainty. It's also bringing change, but also bringing some new positives and opportunities for the sectors, including the seafood sector. And from a whitefish point of view, of course, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic would start from supply side, from fishing, from the vessels, and we'd go through the processing, the trade, distribution, and then food service and demand. So I would like to start the discussion with the trade. So this is the famous Rabobank seafood trade map. This is the famous Rabobank seafood trade map, which you might have seen already. And as Drew said in the beginning of in the opening, whitefish is the most traded category within the seafood sector, and it is here in our map. It's this like a light blue arrows. As you can see here, there is a big chunk of trade, particularly ground fish coming from Russia into China as raw material, then leaving China after it's being processed for Europe and for the US. And all of these trade flows, actually, like everything you see in this map has been under the impact of COVID-19. So in the next slides, I would like to focus on the recent trade data. So here I have the China's ground fish imports for the recent months. You might be wondering why I don't have any data in January and February. Unfortunately, it was not reported. It could be because it was the peak time of the COVID-19 in China that could have caused some disruptions. But luckily, we have the data for March and April, and we can compare 2020 data with 2019. So in March and April, normally the China's ground fish imports peak, and we were wondering in the beginning of the year how Corona would be impacting this trade flows. And now we can actually say that it has impacted a bit, but not quite a lot as we have expected. But if we focus on it a little bit more and look at the trade flows by supplier, so as you all know, Russia is like the most important partner for China in terms of ground fish imports, and it's followed by US and Norway. And here we see that the imports from Russia has decreased by 9% in April with respect to the April 2019. That is in volumes. The volumes have been decreasing by 9%, but we see a much higher decrease in terms of values. So a decrease by almost 23%. So when we look at the US, it's more consistent. So there's both decrease in terms of volumes and the values. But in Russia, it more looks like a value decrease. So maybe this could be a nice discussion point for the panel later on. I would be curious to know if they have also noticed that if they have observed a drop in value of Russian supply that's coming to China. Then I have here the Chinese ground fish exports. So again, only I have the data available for March and April, not for January and February. But when we look at these trade flows, we also see that there is a decrease, and for both months, in terms of volumes, the decrease is almost a quarter of the 1 year before trade volumes. By looking at it again only for April by country, EU is China exports a very big part of ground fish to EU, followed by the US. But in this time in exports, we see also a more consistent decrease. So the volumes are changing by almost a quarter, both going to the EU and the US. But also we observe a value decrease of 20%. And before finalizing on this chapter, on this like a trade chapter, I would like to shortly touch base with freshwater imports of China. So this is another emerging trade flow, and we already discussed before that China is becoming a freshwater fish importer And actually already last year in September, China was a net freshwater fish importer. And we see these trends going on because the freshwater fish imports into China in 2020, April and March, are much higher than the ones in 2019. And of course, this is not the only impact of the coronavirus. Also, the impact of African swine fever is reflected on these trade flows because of the growing demand for the whitefish, particularly for the pangasius coming from Vietnam. And I don't have the data here, but we observe a positive trend for the US, where the freshwater fish imports, it's not increasing. And in this last and a concluding chapter, I would like to draw a more micro picture and focus more on the micro impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the seafood industry, but again, particularly for the whitefish industry. So the trends the pandemic has accelerated, the behavioral changes it has caused, and what can it represent for the seafood industry. So during the pandemic, I think we have all adopted new habits, including also new eating and cooking habits. So we started cooking more at home. Some of us were forced to cook more at home. And in the last months, you know, there was a huge increase in the purchases of air fryers, bread makers, pizza ovens, and so on. So people have been, you know, people have started to cook from scratch. They've been following, you know, like chefs cooking online through Zoom or Instagram live videos and so on. And while this is happening, also we have also observed has been new seafood consumers. So for instance, particularly in the US, some seafood consumers, seafood purchasers are the first-time buyers. They have been eating different types of seafood in the restaurants, but they were never really buying it and cooking themselves. So here I have two charts. The first one, the upper one, is shows the results of a survey when consumers were asked, "What would you continue to cook, still cook at home after the lockdown, or would you go to the restaurants?" And you can see that here, as more than 70% of the respondents say that they will continue to cook more after restaurants reopen. And of course, there are some consumers who is already willing to go to the restaurants, but some of this cooking will stick because now some consumers know that it's actually not that hard to cook fish at home, so they get used to it, and now they know the recipes and they have the right equipment. So we expect this trend to continue after the post-corona as well. And here my lower chart is from OpenTable, and it shows the dinner reservations. So we see that as the economies are opening up, consumers are slowly going back to restaurants. So this dark blue line shows the shows for Germany, as Germany has opened up a little bit before than the rest of the countries. So here you can see that people started to go back to restaurants, but still, when you look at the rates, it's still stuck at by 25%. So restaurants might be opening up, but it doesn't mean that consumers are ready to go. Some are still avoiding, some still don't feel safe to go out. And also another positive that I see for the seafood industry, but particularly for the whitefish industry, is the growth in frozen seafood sales. So we have been you know, buying more frozen food, but also if you look at this chart here, we have been buying more frozen foods, but we have been also buying different frozen foods, and we have been also buying from different brands. So we have all been a bit experimental, I think, in this process. And the lower chart here also shows the result of the survey when consumers were asked if they will continue to buy frozen seafood in the post-corona. And as you can see here, more than 30% says that they will buy somewhat more, and almost 40% says about the same. And there is a part that says we're going to buy a lot more. So that's also very positive for the whitefish industry, because consumers have discovered something maybe they haven't tried experiment before. Now they are sure about maybe the taste of frozen sorry, the taste of frozen food, frozen seafood, how convenient it is, or how it's easy to cook. But of course, those two charts also bring some questions, and maybe they will be later discussed in the panel later on. So how will the seafood industry keep this trend going? Will there be new product launches? And considering the recession, economic downturn that we are expecting for the, for the rest of 2020 and going into 2021, would it be only down trading, or would it also be up trading too? Will the seafood companies work on new products to bring the restaurant experience to consumers? And also, by looking at this chart here, what does it mean for the brands? What does this mean for the private label? Would they bring new opportunities? So I think those are all questions that the answers we'll find out later on. And this is also my last slide, it's on the growth of e-commerce. So COVID-19, as you know, has also accelerated the online grocery shopping globally. And this trend has been fast-forwarded quite a few years ahead due to the pandemic. And I have two charts here showing the consumer foods purchases in stores and also through online channels for France and for Spain. And normally the share of food in total online sales is lower, but we see that this is still growing. And of course, it has boomed during the lockdown period. But we see that the share is still higher. This is the data for 2000 for May, end of May already. So after the lockdown, some consumers have shifted to other channels, but e-commerce still continued, and it's still higher than the pre-COVID levels. So of course, this also brings new opportunities for the seafood too, because seafood kind of lags behind in terms of online sales, and I think it started to change already. Saying that, I would like to end the presentation on the point that it's still uncertain what type of structural changes will COVID-19 will bring to the industry, and what would be the long-term impacts will be. Now I mainly discussed the short-term to mid-term impacts, but I want to emphasize the positives and the opportunities for the seafood industry. Now there is a trend from the consumers. There is a trend for more healthy food. There are new seafood consumers. There is demand for new products, and also the e-commerce is growing. Yeah. So the question is, how would we as a seafood industry keep this trend going? And I leave it to the panel from here. Hope I managed to give you some food for thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beyhan. That was fantastic. I will ask the panelists to turn on their webcams so that we can all get the discussion going. And then when I ask the first question, I'll have everyone introduce themselves. But I think that Beyhan set the absolute perfect tone for what we need to talk about today. The statistics are fascinating, and they show that indeed things are changing radically for the global economy and for seafood. Beyhan started with China, and China's importance in the global processing sector can't be understated. And I think, I was at that North Atlantic forum that Beyhan mentioned, as was Klaus and Morten, and I think that at that time, when that scenario 4 was presented, at least myself, I kind of thought, oh, yeah, well, I guess it's important to point out a worst case scenario just in case. But at that time, it was primarily China that was the concern. And it was, I think, in the West, not seen as something that would impact impact the economies here, impact the trade flows necessarily. It was very acutely a problem with trade flows in and out of China. So Jerry, maybe you can start us off a bit. At that time, there were concerns about what role China would play in the whitefish processing sector, how trade flows might change if China was unable to staff its processing plants, and the implications. But can you tell us a bit about how that arc has gone? Are we now in a recovery stage where we're back to where we were before in terms of China's role?
Hello, everybody. This is Jerry Chang. I say hi from Seattle. We have a little bit overcasted today. Yeah, thanks for the invitation from IntraFish. It's very interesting to have a discussion about China. When you talk about seafood industry, you just cannot leave China. China is still the largest seafood production countries, and also emerging as one of the largest seafood consumer countries. For somebody who do not know my company, Chang International is the import in Seattle. We founded in 1994. We are processor and distributor in China over 100 cities. So we have a plant in Qingdao. We have a distribution office in the several cities, and we have a sales rep nationwide. Yeah, the virus started from China, and China also the first country to get slowly recovered. Probably consumer know that China is the country that we have still have many problems. As you know, this is like salmon case in Beijing. But let me show you some of the numbers I collected in the last couple of weeks. The total China, the export of fisheries product in volume amount is dropped 18% roughly in both volume amount from January to April 2020 compared to same period time last year. The China total import of fisheries product in volume and amount dropped. The volume dropped 1.87% and the value dropped 10.77%. So we can, that's also from January to April 2020 compared to same period of time last year. So we can see that definitely this is the big change, especially in the salmon. I have custom data from China Customs. The salmon in the first quarter of 2020, the volume dropped 77%. That's the Atlantic salmon. So that's a huge drop in a single species. As far as the whitefish processing industry in China, I've been talking to my team, my counterpart in the processing seafood industry in China. We are facing much more difficult time than previous years. That's less demand. I calculated average about 30% less demand. So the processor really short of these orders. The capacity, we are down average about 20% because of the still hard to recruit workers. We have less work return after Chinese New Year. We all know that whitefish price, both in HNG price and finished product, dropped as well. I just give you an example from the pollock. Pollock today HNG is roughly 1115 to 1180. But last year, the same period of time is 1400 to 1550 in 2019. Finished product today, you talk about China price 2600 to 2800. But last year that was 32 to 3400 in 2019. So that's a big change. Domestic market, I think, is in very silent mode now because this coronavirus found in the cutting board of salmon in Xinfadi market in China. That's bring a huge impact on the seafood sales in China. I have a survey come from some other reports I can show you later if somebody asks questions. But it sales in the retail market is dropped from 10% to 90%, depending on the retail chains, depending on the geographic locations. So
well, and we will return.
Go ahead.
We will return, Jerry. I was going to say to the consumer side of China when we move to the consumption side of things, because that to me is a fascinating canary in the coal mine to see how things are going to recover there. But I'll just thanks for setting up the situation on the processing in China. Klaus, I'm going to go to you now. You obviously have footprints in multiple different countries. So tell us a little bit about your view, having listened to Rabobank, having listened to and had discussions with Jerry about the recovery on the processing side in China. What's your view on how the trade flows have changed since March?
Thank you, Drew, and thank you to you and IntraFish for inviting me to this panel. We operate processing plants in 5 different countries. So we are in Vietnam, and then we have 4 plants across Europe. So what became quite apparent quite early in the process, and our first priority was to keep our staff safe. Having said that, but the second priority was to have the customers getting the products hopefully on time. And we must say that the trade flow of raw material has not been jeopardized to a large extent. We import about 98% of what we utilize in our plants, and we export about 99% from those plants to about 50 countries. And logistically, which we thought was going to be the biggest challenge, has actually worked quite well. Of course, we are fortunate that we are have the majority of our production very close to where the fishing is taking place. And the fishing just came into the peak of the season. So whereas a big part of HNG cod and HNG haddock normally goes to China, there was a lot of uncertainty in that part of the world. So we were actually offered more cod than we normally see, more haddock than we normally see that time of the year. So I think if you talk about some change in trade flows, more raw material is coming into Europe, trying to get into Europe, because we can also act much faster to the extra demand that we see in the market, so that we can provide Steve's employer with fish in 4 weeks notice, where it's 4 to 6 months when it comes from Asia. So when you have a sudden pickup in demand of blocks or portions or whatever the format is, we were in the absolute right place to do that. So after a few weeks of getting all the production sites in a new mode, where we had we're controlling the shifts, have extra cleaning, we had plexiglass through the lines and so on, it all became how can we get the production through the plant so we can serve our customers. And I'm proud to say that our staff done extremely well. So we have actually seen a small advantage of the change in trade flows.
Now, I'm curious too that Tam, I'll go to you a bit. Looking at the statistics that that Beyhan presented about that huge jump in exports of Pangasius into China, and Jerry, you mentioned the drop off in imports of pollock, for example, as did Beyhan. So is this something where, Tam, you feel like Pangasius is going to continue to shift away from some of these other markets and maybe fill some of that raw material hole that China is looking at?
Thanks, Stu, and hi everybody. I'm Tam Nguyen. I'm the CEO of Vinh Hoan Corporation. We farm and we process Pangasius. I think Jerry was talking about the accumulated number from January to April. Why Beyhan was talking about April specifically for Pangasius, actually it was already fully recovered. The export of Pangasius to China was already fully recovered in April. And the strong demand continues in May and up to now. So that's how things are going in terms of Pangasius. I'm also glad to join the web webinar to share the other update of the industry. Actually, the total export of Pangasius globally up to now is already also approximately 15% down by volume and more than 30% down by value. So the positive side we have had with China, but actually the industry got the quite a hard hit in the other markets in April and May, especially in the US. Although it's recovering now in the US when things were open earlier this month. This is what we are seeing up to date for the Pangasius export.
Jerry, tell us a little bit about that, about Pangasius and that steep rise in what we've seen on imports into China. Is that helping keep capacity up, and is that running into some of the same channels in terms of processing in China that would have been used by pollock and cod that have seen this steep drop off?
Yeah, Pangasius is the start to enter China probably. Pick up this market in China probably 5 to 10 years ago, I guess. And it's the now Pangasius. Tam, you may correct me if I'm wrong. Now the Pangasius, 50% of your market shares now is in China market, if I remember, worldwide. So we definitely see Pangasius being popular in the restaurant, in the retail. And it's very popular item in the hot pot, like Sichuan hot pot, they use a lot. But believe it or not, we also see more opportunity in the whitefish, particularly in the single frozen pollock and the double frozen pollock in China business. We just recently landed a couple of national chain for the single pollock and the double frozen pollock as well. So I guess with this coronavirus outbreak time, the consumer like to take some fish, cook more at the food, and obviously not just the Pangasius but pollock will become a inexpensive, the whitefish for the Chinese consumer as well. We expect that the single pollock fillets will, from our channels, we believe will be probably at least, we estimate probably doubled in the next 12 months if this coronavirus things back to, recover back to normals. So we're excited to see Chinese consumer to recognize the value of the more whitefish, put this way.
So Steve, just from your perspective on logistics, how has that changed since March for Bird's Eye Igloo and Nomad in terms of sourcing? Has there been logistical hiccups? Has there been changes in species, trade flows, prices, things that have disrupted your supply side issues?
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm Steve Challouma. I'm the general manager for Bird's Eye in the UK, which is the leading frozen food brand. To be honest, from a sourcing point of view and looking at it as a commercial guy selling into the market, we've seen very little disruption from a sourcing point of view because both our procurement team obviously sources from a global supply chain and has worked very collaboratively, and a lot of our suppliers have been very helpful to do all of that they can to service our growing needs, and have done a brilliant job, and I really am really grateful for that. So of course we might have had to shorten some lead times, and that's sort of been mentioned already, to overcome our normal kind of cycles, but it's incredible to see the collaboration that has been achieved and the amount of flexibility and agility that's been shown to maintain supply. The main focus for us really has been to maintain focusing on availability in the stores, in the retail stores, because that's really where the pinch point has been, since we saw such a massive increase in demand in the heart of the pandemic. And I'd say whitefish in particular was a particular beneficiary, if that's the right word to use, of that surge in demand, and in particular products like ours. So we saw, whereas the frozen market in total grew between 35 and 40%, products like fish fingers that you mentioned at the beginning of the webinar grew 60%. It was one of our fastest growing segments, because all of a sudden you had the nation's children at home schooling, so it's another meal. And it wasn't just stockpiling, it came through in terms of consumption in home. So both from a sourcing and procurement point of view, and then importantly from a manufacturing point of view, which also was a pinch point. And our factories did a fantastic job, not only to put measures in place to protect our staff, but then also to put in extra shifts in order to fulfill that demand. Now, clearly there's some measures that we took, like having to pull price promotions, for example, or having to pull advertising in the short term in order to not encourage out of stock and availability issues. But the response of the industry at large and the supply chain has been excellent, actually, I would say. And I know there's many suppliers here, so I thank all the efforts that people have made in that regard.
So I want to go back to you, Klaus, a little bit. Do you think that that just general trade flows, some of these logistical issues, particularly in the beginning with China, do you think that's changed the industry's thinking about China's role in global whitefish processing? Was there a sense that that too many eggs were in one basket, so to speak?
The memory is sometimes short, so what's going to be the outcome in a year and a half is not easy to say. But I think that the companies that had put all eggs in one basket at least now realize that that might not be the sensible way of doing it going forward. So I think we will see some shifts, but I still think what Jerry said in the beginning. I mean, China is going to be the production hub for quite a few products also in the years to come. But I think it will be more balanced, and I'm absolutely convinced that not only this pandemic, but this pandemic in special, but we also had the trade wars early on with China. So it's been highlighted for about a year and a half, that China is fantastic at doing what they're doing, but it is political and now also a health risk to have too many eggs in that basket. So we see some of get some new contacts actually from potential customers in Europe that want to place also orders in Europe. I always said that was one of Espersen's key strategic intents, was to be in both in Asia and in Europe, to be able to serve important customers, and it's a bad way to. It's been proven to be right, but it's really proven that that concept is winning, and I think more will probably do the same.
So I'm curious too, Tam, going to you, does that mean, and Klaus, you have operations in Vietnam, but Tam, do you see Vietnam playing a more important role in processing whitefish, given what Klaus said about disruption in supply and concerns about over-reliance on China?
Yeah, I think I agree with Klaus that the highlight has been discussing for the last 2 years, but right now like the motivation is more, I can say. We also receiving increasing interest from different importers for whitefish processed in Vietnam. So we believe that in the time to come, there will be more factories, I mean capacities, processing capacity, capabilities available, and yeah, the move has been accelerated. However, there at the same time there have been some difficulties in terms of logistics, because you know right now like there's no travel, and like people all feel uncomfortable like making projects move on very quickly. But yeah, we believe that there have been a lot of discussions going on and a lot of preparation, both in terms of facilities and yeah, and workforce.
So somebody with a completely different set of challenges in the supply chain, Morten, you've been dealing primarily in fresh and consumer-facing products. Maybe you can talk a bit about what your arc has been since March and the challenges you've had in getting product to market. Fresh is a completely different ballgame, obviously, but tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I'm Morten Jensen. I'm COO Whitefish for Insula. Insula, we are a Nordic country. We have about 25 production sites in the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark. And we are producing a wide range of products, anything from canned to smoked, fresh, frozen, breaded. We are focusing on the retail and the Nordic markets. But we are, as Drew was saying, we are also exporting quite a lot of fresh fish to the European market. We haven't experienced big problems getting products into the market. We are exporting a lot by sea and by truck. And there has not, I must say that the border crossing and the border crossing in Europe has been working perfectly. There's been some delays, but I have to say that it's been very, very minor. Also, our export into the UK has gone quite good, quite flawless. The only export we have experienced is air freight, due to the change due to the stop of international flights. The cargo transport has been heavily hit, and where we would normally pay like 15 kroner per kilo for air freight, we're now paying 50 to 60 kroner per kilo, and that has especially hit our export to the US market and also into the Asian markets of fresh fish. We've been mainly hit on the HoReCa, on the catering sector. We are mainly focusing on the retail sector, but of course we are also supplying into the hotel catering and tourist sector, and of course that has been very heavily hit. And the increase we have experienced in retail sales has not been able to compensate for the loss we had in the catering segment. the fresh markets in Europe have been heavily hit, especially in April and May. We saw very unstable markets, and we also experienced an increased demand for frozen products. So what we experience is that there's a strong demand for frozen pre-packed products, and there's less demand for products sold in counters, self-service counters, or also in fresh counters in general. But we also see that the wholesale market is very heavily hit. Some of our customers actually closed. We sell a lot of fish to the fresh market in Paris, to the Rungis. Some of our old customers there, they choose to close for a period of time. So some of the whitefish products that would easily be sold, they were suddenly posing a big challenge. It's slowly coming back, but it's still very, very difficult. I think what saved the Norwegian export was the currency, was the oil price. The Norwegian krone were all-time weak in March and April, and that actually that secured a good sales price in Norwegian currency. But we can see if we measure our sales prices in euro or in sterling or in dollar, markets were under pressure, under heavily pressure. We also see that the salted products, salt fish and dried salt fish, clipped fish, are under pressure. The markets are, of course, export to Brazil. Everybody knows about the situation there. And I'm very concerned about how this sector will perform in 2021.
Yeah, so that's a good segue, Morten, into the consumer side of things and moving a bit downstream. Just a quick note for all our attendees: if you do want to ask questions, you can click on the right-hand side there of the webinar system there and ask a question. And with about 10 minutes left, we'll have some Q&A. You'll be able to direct some questions at the panel. So moving downstream, Steve, you mentioned earlier the huge shift in habits toward frozen, and I think that's been across the board, across several markets. So what have you seen in terms of growth? And the biggest challenge now is maintaining those customers. So tell us a little bit about the shift. I mean, were you surprised by the growth? Was this expected when you heard about the lockdowns in the UK?
Well, clearly early on, we were seeing some of the other categories in the supermarket. I think it was toilet roll was the one that had the most media attention in the UK. I'm sure it was in some other countries as well. But we had the being a European business, part of Nomad Foods in the UK, we were able to see what was already happening in our Italian market under the Findus brand. So, that in a way gave us a couple of weeks of heads up. Now, clearly it was such an unpredictable situation that it was impossible to foresee what a huge increase that we would see. But when the government was announcing things like shutting down all the out of home and children being homeschooled and the rest of it, then it was no surprise to see it was more frozen overall grew very hugely, but some of those staple reliable categories like fish fingers, coated fish as well, the Brits love their fish and chips meals, and all of that was shut down as well, benefited disproportionately. So in terms of how that's been sustained, we saw this kind of big peak in March, but to be honest, it's come down, but it's still sustained at quite a high level. So even into June, sales of our whitefish ranges, not just for us and for the market as well, are in the mid-20% growth still. And that's been at that level for about the last 3 months in the UK, and we do see that in other European markets as well. So we do, clearly things are starting to unlock and slowly get back to normal, but we foresee that there will be an ongoing increase in frozen consumption, because essentially one of the consequences of this situation is a whole load of new consumers that wouldn't regularly buy frozen food have come into the market. So just to put a couple of numbers to that, normally in a four-week period, 11 million British households would buy our brands. In the 4 weeks at most intensive, it was 13 million. So there's 2 million more consumers, and those consumer groups were different to our regular consumers. We had more empty nester consumers, older consumers, and more pre-family consumers as well. So it's a massive trial. You can view it as a massive trial driving exercise, actually. And you know, Beyhan was so right with her assessment in terms of the consumer and rediscovering home cooking, and that, you know, actually whitefish can be a great option. And then the other discontinuous thing that's happened has been there's been a surge in the purchase of freezers in the home, which has always been a limiting factor, actually, because unlike ambient food, you're limited by you know, the size of your freezer, and in fact the average freezer size has been declining. But then we've seen a 68% increase in the sale of freezers in homes. So all of a sudden there's going to be an ongoing increase in the amount of freezer capacity in home. So even if we can keep a relatively modest proportion of that 2 million extra consumers that trialed the category, which we think we can, then we think there'll be a sustained increase in the post-COVID period as well.
So Klaus, I see you nodding over there with Steve about these trends. So who ends up being the winners from a species point of view? Does this mean that consumers are going to look at sort of lower price point products? Pangasius, for example, we've seen some Pangasius-based products really do well in the UK market. But do you see these trends sticking, and do you see this changing the types of products consumers would purchase?
I don't think we have seen it yet. We also see less sales of chilled compared to what we had expected, and we believe that is probably something to do with changing pattern of how often people actually go to buy their evening meal. If you go 3 or 4 times a week, there's a more tendency there to take fresh meat or fresh fish. If you buy in once a week because you don't want to be out there too much, you probably put more into the freezer. But we have talked about it internally in the company, and if the economies are really severely hit, if you have a looming economy, then it's quite, if you look back and look at the history when we had crisis in 2001 and 2009, there's a tendency that you trade down, so you will, it might offend somebody, but you will not buy cut fish fingers, you will only buy Alaskan pollock fish fingers instead, right? Somebody will be angry with me now, but there's a tendency
not at all.
that you trade down and try to see if you can get a cheaper option. So we are very, very carefully looking into this to see if we see changes going forward. For now, a lot of the species have actually been reduced a little bit in price, 10 to 20%. So there's something for the consumer already to take advantage of as well, at least in 2021, I think. So it's something that historically has happened. We have not seen it yet, but we will monitor it very carefully.
So I'll go over to you, Morten, and maybe you can talk a bit about chilled. Do you see the overarching economic pressure that is looming here? We saw Beyhan's projections for 2020 and ahead, and I think those are in line with what a lot of projections are for what we might face in 2021. Do you see that having a downward pressure on consumption for fresh and chilled as people maybe have a bit less disposable income, maybe are a bit concerned about their economic fortunes?
It's a very good question, and I think it's maybe a little bit premature to conclude that yet, but you have a good point. I think everybody have a good point here. I think you have 2 directions in the market. One is going value for money because of less buying power, and the other one is that you're replacing restaurant visits with home meal.
Yeah.
So you want to indulge, you want to invite your best friends, and then you want high quality. So we're actually seeing our most expensive salmon loin is selling very well. But we're also seeing that like breaded products is also selling very well. And then again, people are stockpiling now our canned products. I think that was a very temporary situation. But I think in the longer run, we would see that the market is going in two ways. That you have the weekend shopping, and then you have the weekly shopping, where you probably are going more for value for money. And that means that we as a processor, we as a innovator, we need to actually adjust our products to that trend.
So Tam,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Morten.
No. So I think actually that there's going to be a kind of a gap in the middle.
Yeah, and Tam, I'm wondering
too. Restaurants as well. Have you seen that with restaurants? You need to offer something special. You need to offer high quality, or you need to offer high value. The people in the middle are struggling, and I think you're going to see that development will continue. The same with the retailers. It's the corner shop or it's the one-stop shoppings that are actually increasing in turnover now.
So Tam, where do you think Pangasius falls in this mix? Because it is a value species. Do you see opportunities for a species like Pangasius if there is this economic pressure? Does that mean people may move toward a species like Pangasius more?
Yes, we do. However, how Pangasius takes the advantage or takes the opportunity, it depends from one market to the other. I take Europe as an example. So Pangasius export to UK has been increasing because the fish is consumed in UK and in Europe in general, mostly in retail. And in Spain, yeah, it is where the fish has been really taking the opportunity by its value, because it has become more affordable. I mean, like price has been low anyways in terms of supply side, and the fish has been always priced for value in the markets like Spain. So we have been seeing increasing demand and increasing orders for supermarkets in Spain. And speaking of the consumers' patterns and which species could take the opportunity from time to time of the whole situation, I just want to add that for the US, for food service sector, we also heard from our importers and customers that when the restaurants were first opened early this month, they saw Pangasius accelerating in terms of recovery compared to the other species, because the fish fits very well at casual dining and quick meals. So when restaurants were just first opened, and consumers seem to prioritize those dinings rather than very fancy and luxury ones. So yeah, I think yeah, in some period of time, the fish did have some opportunities to have some positive move in the last few weeks and few months.
Jerry, maybe you could talk to us about China, since it has been sort of the first country to recover and open up. What have we seen in terms of consumer behavior, and have they returned to restaurants in the same way? In what way are they looking for different products than they may have been a couple months ago?
Well, yeah, China is a very big country, and when this reopened, I remember in the May 1st holiday, there's a very crowded population in the resort area, and the government was a little bit scared, because like Wuhan, people have been locked there for almost 2 or 3 months. They just want to get out, enjoy the kind of freedom. I think the what I can see that after this outbreak of this coronavirus, the top mind of the consumer in China is the health, safe. That's become we learned from our consumers, even have some surveys, and we think this is their top thinking. So obviously, the consumer will prefer more online shopping, will be cook more at home, eat more cooked food. Believe it or not, this is the recommended by CDC China. You know, encourage consumer to eat more cooked food than raw foods. We also see that price is not as sensitive as used to be, and some consumer, believe it or not, they want to see that more standard foods then produced from machine rather than produced from labor-intensive plant. I wanted to share with the one survey result I'm getting from MSC China office, but this is the conducted by the Global Skin UK consulting company. They talk about what is top hobby for the seafood consumers in China, and believe it or not, healthy food nutrition is 49%, is highest. And the fitness, the health lifestyle, 49%, travel and holiday, 43%, sustainable living, 37%, cooking and recipe, 35%, recycling, waste reduction, plastic pollution, 31%, fish and seafood, 31%. Environmentalism, 30%, and eating out of restaurant, 27%, nature and natural history is 24%. But look at these seafood consumers in China. The top concern is the healthy food and nutrition, 49%. That's, I think, good data I can share with the audience here.
So that then benefits the overall the seafood sector. What is the perception now of imported seafood? You know, Western brands in the seafood market. At one point, that was seen as, correct me if I'm wrong, that was seen as a positive from a consumer food safety point of view. Now, although the CDC in China has been very clear that salmon was not a COVID carrier, things are already, the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, with how it's been covered in China. How then does that affect imported seafood? Have consumers changed their perception of imported seafood? Are they more liable to focus on domestic production? What's the general viewpoint there?
Well, I think seafood, believe it or not, was chosen as a scapegoat as this contaminated virus in Beijing wholesale market. That was over 40 samples taken, including cutting board of salmon. The coronavirus was also found in the other samples, not just the salmon. So, unfortunately, salmon was chosen as the, reason. Then, that's why the Chinese government sent the team to Norway, check 3 sites, and Chinese customs start to have mandatory check the imported seafood. There's no bans. You can still import fresh salmon into China, but you need to spend a couple of days to have this test result, and that will significantly reduce the shelf life. Now salmon, as long as you have test results, no matter salmon or species, now you can still sell it. But as I mentioned in the first questions, now China, the seafood market is in the silent mode. We had there was one chain, like Whole Foods chain in China. We had this VIP festival. Our sales about half down compared to the same period of time last year, because we seafood salmon case,
So that's had an effect on whitefish as well. Then all of the seafood, not just salmon.
All seafood, especially in the wholesale market, which we also call the wholesale market, mainly supplied to food service and distributions. And I briefly calculated percentage of this wholesale market. In the past, wholesale market, probably 70% of seafood sales in China goes to the wholesale market. In the retail, probably 25%. In the e-commerce, probably 5%. Now, I believe wholesale market probably 20%, but retail raised to 40%, and e-commerce raised to 30%. Let's see how this changes, the market sections. But again, this is the I also have a survey report showing we collect. I think this survey report collected data from 20 retail chains in China, from 5 regional regions in China plus national chains, that indicated their seafood sales down anywhere from 10% to 90%. So that's the situation now in China.
So Morten, to go to you, is there among retail consumers a desire to have products sourced more locally? It seems to me that part of the trend of being holed up in your house, of maybe connecting more with your community. All of us are probably going out for walks more, and certainly we were discussing with the panel prior to starting the webinar, most of us are used to going in the springtime to Brussels and Boston. We're never in the same place, right? But I think many of the world is feeling this way. So do you think that retrenchment of being cooped up in your house, do you think there's a connection with community a bit more towards locally caught fresh fish as well?
Well, we have now TV commercials in Norway promoting Norwegian seafood. And we have retailers that are promoting that they are selling Norwegian meat. And I guess that other countries are doing the same. I know that some of the retailers in France were under pressure from some of the fishermen's organizations, because they suddenly had trouble selling their local catches to the fresh markets, and they were trying to push the retailers to sell more French. So I think this is a natural result of the situation. And I guess that when we're all in crisis, nationalism unfortunately thrives. It can be both good and bad. But the answer is yes, we do see that. Whether that's going to be a permanent situation, I'm not sure. But there's definitely in the Nordic countries more awareness. At least that's our experience, that there's more awareness among the consumers of buying more. They look more to the packaging. What does it say? And the retailers definitely use this. I guess the same in Denmark and Sweden.
I'm curious, Klaus, from your perspective, one of the things that Jerry mentioned and Beyhan mentioned in the beginning, it seems to me that many of the trends that we've been seeing, they existed before, they've just been supercharged. And I think the big one there is e-commerce, which has been extremely sophisticated in China for a long time. But I'm curious, how is Espersen thinking about e-commerce with the retail side of your business? Are there opportunities there? How are you exploring them? Where do you see that sector going for you?
Well, it's definitely been highlighted that e-commerce is a big part of the future. I think the Beyhan's numbers were like 10%. I think it was in France. Was now from retail, came from e-commerce, and it's here to come and grow. Sorry, here to stay and also grow. It's part of our whole business model already, and but we are going to have more focus on it going forward, because a lot of people found out how convenient it is. Like Steve was saying before, we got a lot of new consumers. We need to retain them, and so it's the same for people getting fresh food from or frozen food from e-commerce the first time. So it's definitely here to grow. They need to be better in logistics. I think that's a big challenge, but I think it's an area of more focus in the future. That's for sure.
Steve, I see you nodding over there. Is that something where Bird's Eye Igloo is thinking about a new way to position itself for this growth in e-commerce? I'm sure many of us have boxes piling up on our front door.
Sure.
Is there a role for frozen and fresh seafood in e-commerce that's much broader than we see today?
Well, absolutely, and that's been one of the biggest step changes we've seen in our business. So, you know, in the UK, within Europe, UK is probably a bit more advanced and down the line on e-commerce, but we've seen a doubling of the proportion of our business sold through e-commerce. So it's gone from, you know, between 10 and 12% to 25% now, and so that's a quarter of our business. So that has implications organizationally in terms of the amount of focus we put on that area and the talent we put on that area. But we see it actually as a huge opportunity, because in an e-com environment on a Tesco.com or Ocado or whatever, there's a lot of the barriers that you just get removed that you would have in store, both in terms of in a physical store. Frozen food can be quite an unattractive area to shop. It's the last thing you get to. It's a cold environment. It's difficult to merchandise things together or have shippers in other areas of the store. Whereas you can be so creative in e-commerce, you can bundle products together, whether they're in frozen or not in frozen, and create solution-based merchandising, for example, you know, for a great night in or whatever it is, a football night in or whatever it is. So we see it as a huge opportunity, and now for us is the time to double down on that opportunity, because retailers have invested in capacity, and that's here to stay. You know, I think the challenge for the retailers more is it's a very expensive cost to serve model for them in terms of route to market. So hopefully with scale, will come an improvement in the economics for the retailer as well. But certainly from a brand point of view, we've seen a big increase, and we see that's something will continue to develop.
You know, you mentioned that frozen, obviously frozen seafood has exploded in sales at retail around the world. But what do you think it's going to take in terms of new product development? Is there innovation that's needed in the whitefish space as consumer interests change? And maybe Steve, we can start with you, and then I'd be curious to hear Morten's opinion on this as well.
Yeah, I think innovation will always play a role, but if and certainly consumers have become more experimental, but really what retailers have gone through several cycles of simplifying their ranges and rationalizing the amount of to simplify both the shopping experience and also the operation in store, especially as a lot of stores are used for picking for e-commerce as well. So, you know, innovation will always play a role, but, you know, actually where we've seen the biggest increases in sales has been in the blockbuster products, the most famous products, and we see that being sustained, and innovation will play a role. And, you know, we've had some really good successes, but the biggest successes we have are actually with the more familiar things. The more niche you get, and you go too far, and especially in the frozen category, which is more of a staple thing, it tends to be a high level of churn going on there. You know, possibly in the fresh market, you might see more churn. So it will play a role, and we've got some exciting stuff coming up later this year as well that takes us in a few different directions. But it's not. It's as much around the quality within the basics as it is around innovation.
So Morten, I'm curious for you. You mentioned that retail has not been able to offset the loss in Horeca sales. Is there? There's been a lot of discussions about pivoting to retail away from food service. Is there opportunities with value-added products, with new products that could help shift that balance a bit more towards the retail side?
Yeah, I think, that most definitely, I think so. And I think that e-commerce is also an opportunity for our industry to recruit younger consumers. We know, we know that most seafood consumers, unfortunately, are around our age, and we need to recruit younger consumers. I hope I didn't offend too many by saying that. Sorry, Tam. You're much younger, of course. I think that the sushi trend was a good example of that. But I think also that the e-commerce can be an opportunity to recruit younger consumers. We have also been working a lot with packaging, and not least food waste, where you have individual packaging. When you have a fresh product, like a smoked product, or you have like a product with, you don't want the fishy, smelly taste in your fridge. So you do something about the packaging, so you don't waste the product if you can't eat all of it. And I think there are many, many ways here that we can actually make our products more attractive to new consumers, because there's a big potential for us. And I think this could be a kind of a game changer for us, that we can attract the younger generations to eat more seafood.
Just quickly to you on that, Klaus, as well. I mean, is that a pivot where, with the decline in Horeca sales, I think there's expectation that they will return, but at the same time, I don't know that any of us expect them to return to the levels that they were for quite some time. So is that something with Espersen where you do see an opportunity to pivot into the retail segment more, and what types of products would be successful, do you think?
Well, it's there's a lot of new consumers out there, so it's all about making them easy to prepare. So and it's not only about serving seafood; it's about serving meals. So we have to find a way where they are comfortable in cooking seafood. For newcomers, that is one of the first barriers. And I think we're getting really fast moving in that direction. We have had more products developed in the first 6 months than we had it for in a normal full year. So the train has left the station, so to speak. And I think also when it comes to Morten just touched it on packaging and food waste in general, this also gives us a lot of opportunities to do it smarter, because we have been very traditional in the way we have created packaging. We have twisted the picture and twisted the color and twisted the logo, and so it's more about maybe thinking a bit longer term and make smarter packaging as well, and less packaging with the products. So it's definitely something that is we are going to monitor very, very carefully and get our part of.
So I'm going to call in my colleague, John Fiorillo, who's been monitoring questions coming in from the audience. John, any that you'd like to address to the panelists? I think you're on the line.
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to follow up on Klaus's comment just a second ago, and maybe ask Steve if he could tell us, are you hearing from consumers as far as new products that they want now that you have all these consumers engaged in frozen, for example? Are you hearing any product developments that they're looking for? Any new items?
They're not. Consumers find it hard to be specific and to elaborate on what's, especially within a specific sector like fish. What they definitely do value is more ideas on what to do with products. And, you know, that's something definitely we've seen in this period, is consumers display a lot more creativity with what they do with classic products. So, for example, on our fish fingers, a really well-liked way for adults to enjoy fish fingers is within the fish finger sandwich, and we held a whole national competition, and the amount of creativity that consumers were showing in terms of, you know, an Indian-inspired fish finger sandwich or whatever it was, or fish tacos or whatever it was. So it's as much around creativity and ideas to make family meal times more interesting as it is around you know, new products. You know, we know, especially in Northern European markets, especially in the UK, there's a lot of conservatism when it comes to fish and new species. It's been the same 3 or 4 or 5 species have dominated, and people are a bit more wary around experimentation. So of course people will always want a new recipe and new flavor. They'll definitely, I definitely foresee a trend in terms of more out of home inspired recipes and formats coming in home. I think, you know, that's definitely a trend we see in our chicken business, for example, and we might see that in fish, but they haven't been that specific around specific recipe formats or species or whatever. No, more in terms of recipes.
Klaus, you mentioned product development just a few minutes ago. What types of products are in development, or, you know, what directions are you heading?
Well, it's not one specific heading, you can say. It's multi-species and it's multi-recipes, and it's mostly together with our big customers out there in Europe, like Steve's employer, that we are developing products. So I think it's hard to say that that people are moving in just one direction. So I think I follow Steve's lead there and say it's nothing that is very specific at the minute. It's a broad picture.
Okay. The final question I have is, you all mentioned the impact of dealing with Corona on your operations throughout the supply chain, in your factories, in your distribution. Maybe we can just go around. Maybe we'll start with Tam. How are all these changes going to impact your company's profitability going forward? Because it's not inexpensive to do all the things that everybody's having to do. How is your company prepared to weather all these extra costs as we go through this?
Yeah, thanks, John. We are very fortunate that the situation in Vietnam has been well controlled. So up to now, the informed cases are very low, and no deaths reported. So we've been operating our factories and farms normally since the outbreak of the virus in early February. And the other seafood factories, they have been in a good conditions too. Although some of them had to close for a few days when the sales was falling very sharply in China. Yeah, of course, we did take a measures to promote public health among the workers, especially in our manufacturing site, with a lot of workers working at the same time. But yeah, things up to now have been under very good control, and yeah, everything in Vietnam is like almost back to normal. We working in the office and in factories like normal days.
Okay, Morten, same question.
Yeah, we have basically managed to avoid closing in our sites, and of course we have had very strict visitation controls. One challenge for us is we're just rebuilding one of our factories in Finnmark, north of the Arctic Circle, and we can't get any technical support in. So we're doing every technical service by video link. That's quite a challenge. But it's working better now, and we can actually get the technicians from Iceland to Norway. That's helping. But I think another thing is that we have also managed to do audits by online. and I hope this is maybe a trend that we will see in the future, that there's less traveling, there's less business traveling, and we can do more things online, and actually we can both save the environment and also money by being more innovative in that respect. But basically we have, I mean, I'm now sitting in Norway, but the Nordic countries, maybe Sweden is a small exception, has not been very hard hit, and I think that our authorities have done a good job there. And I think also the business have followed up, and by that we have avoided big interruptions in our production.
Jerry, how about your operations?
Well, we're fortunate we're not in a one basket. We've been imported in Seattle for 26 years. So we what we do that to diversify the product in China, and we continue to serve our client in North America and Europe. What we see in China that we will see more interesting for the new product like pre-packed, as Klaus mentioned, is convenient for consumers, and also the ready meat, ready cook. This is seems like I would say that probably a new direction for many processors in China who were targeted for the domestic market. We also target to the certain age group in China. We are probably the first company to launch the kids lines for the children in China. We also underdevelop for some other ages group as well. So I guess for the survival, and we just need to diversify the product. We also do what we can to maintain and operation, and also the continuous service for our clients in North America as well. Yeah.
Thanks. Klaus, how are you balancing business with the added costs that COVID has put upon your company?
Well, I think I said at the beginning of this webinar that our first priority was to keep our staff, all our employees, safe. So we put in quite a lot of measures and also separated shifts, and we also had this plexiglass between the lines and everything else. So I'd say in the first 4 to 6 weeks, we probably encouraged 10 to 15% increase in production costs. Not on the fish, of course, but on the side of it. But after that, the plants have done an excellent job. And today we are back at the index 100 and 100 plus when it comes to production. So all these things, they have learned to live with it, like we did in the past, that if you go back 30 years, they didn't have hats on or beard nets or whatever. So it's just, and they've been phenomenal. So of course, the first 4 to 6 weeks is a sunk cost that we did somehow. But going forward, we will be able to deliver products at the same cost price and maybe even smarter going forward than we used to do. So, I mean, longer term, we don't see this as increasing cost. And there was something on the freight in the beginning, going to and from Asia and stuff, and that's also getting back to some kind of, we call it a new normal. I think everybody does, so it's not especially Espersen, but it's a new normal. So it's part of our H3 new life. So,
Steve, I saw you nodding in agreement. Is your experience the same?
Very, very similar. So, an overwhelming focus on safety and ensuring that we can maintain production, and that we put the right measures in place, precautionary measures in terms of production and separating people and plexiglass and all the rest of it. But we have a very resilient, collaborative and flexible high caliber kind of supply chain and factory team. So they've done a brilliant job to respond both on the safety whilst maintaining efficiency. So it's not something that would overly constrain us in the long term, I think.
So folks, we do need to wrap up, unfortunately, but I want to take Beyhan's lead and end on a positive note. And so if you could just quickly tell us one positive thing that has come out of this for your operations or for the seafood industry? And Tam, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, we so for the market, we as I shared earlier, we are seeing a recovery in main markets for bank gases already in China since April, and for the US since early this month. And from our company, just want to share our one strategic direction that we are seeing very less impact or no impact from the pandemic related to aquaculture is our wellness business, where we produce collagen and gelatin for pharmaceutical and domestic industries from fish skin. So this pandemic has accelerated us to move more expansions and adding more varieties in this business, and it has become a growing contribution to our revenue and profit. So just wanted to share that.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like some new product development is one of the benefits. Morten, how about you? What's one positive takeaway?
Well, if I just to put one, it is that, like, we are sitting here. We have factories from Denmark to north of the Arctic Circle, meaning that we're traveling a lot, managing our company. And I think that this situation has proven that we're actually able to manage the companies without being present at every site, every given moment. And I also want, like Klaus was saying, that our staff have done a fantastic job in keeping production running and keeping productivity up. And I think it's going to change the way we are managing our companies. I think we're going to be more efficient, and we're going to be more open-minded.
Jerry, any silver lining that you can share?
Obviously, at least one positive. Everybody here, we are immune from this coronavirus. We are stay healthy and safe. But anyway, I still very optimistic about whitefish business, about my business. Animal protein has been more popular items in China, and I'm sure this pandemic more or less that will be over in the next certain months, So I agree with Klaus. We just need to get used to this new normal, and eventually we're back to normals. So maybe next time, we still can see each other somewhere, in Boston or the Brussels, in somewhere. Yeah. So I'm still very optimistic about this industry.
Klaus, what's a positive from your view?
Well, I think if you look from the industry side, I think it's very positive that we have reached so many new consumers. And when I say we, it's not Espersen, it's especially the frozen seafood industry as a whole. We got so many new customers out there; it's unbelievable. And for Espersen, is you can say it's a pleasure that we finally see the benefits of continuing a large frozen natural cod haddock production in Europe. Something we talked about for many years, but now we really see the benefits of having one leg in Asia and two big legs also in Europe. So that's a big step forward for Espersen.
Steve, you have final word to leave us all with a smile on our face. So
thanks. No pressure whatsoever. I'm sure I'll make a Captain Birdseye comment or something like that. That will help. I think really it's that kind of rediscovery and realization, a bit of a aha moment for so many consumers about how great frozen fish can be, frozen whitefish in particular can be. It's kind of, this situation has accelerated so many consumers to realize that it can be not only convenient, which they knew already, but also really fresh tasting. They can do so much with it, and it's sustainable. So, it's a fantastic platform on which to build on for the future.
Great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure for all of you to be here and to have this discussion and to shed all this light for our audience. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Beyhan, who's not on camera, but we know you're out there. Just a reminder, we'll have coverage of this on intrafish.com. There'll be a recording of it, so those of you that didn't make it, or if colleagues didn't make it, let them know. And in the meantime, I hope everyone stays safe and healthy. And that, like Jerry said, we're going to make it through all this, and I'll look forward to seeing everyone in person at an event soon. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Bye.